Pastor Tim, coming to you from Ben Lomita United Methodist Churches. We're trying to spread the Word of God to provide a background by which you can come to understand a little bit better, begin a jumping off point to understand the Scriptures, because we are a story of a linear story of history that God is made known by what God does. And so that's the way we understand the Bible, is as a recording of what God has done and what difference that makes to us. And so we're on Moses now. We've had him through the years as a Pharaoh's child. We have him as a shepherd for his father-in-law. Now he's called by God by a burning bush, and he's back in Egypt. And he has to show the Pharaoh that he's really serious. And so he begins with, he says, what will you do that shows that you have the power of God, that you have the power of the divine? They believed in multiple gods, so they were open to any new god that they didn't know about. And so he takes his staff and he throws it down, and it turns into a snake. Now, the magicians in the court of Pharaoh said, we can do that too. And so he takes a stick and throws it down, and it turns into a snake. Now, there really is a kind of snake that when it's scared, when sometimes the way it's treated, it can become stiff like a stick. And so that's maybe a suggestion of what they were doing. But then Moses' snake eats the Pharaoh's magician snake, and then Moses reaches down to grab it, and it turns back into a snake as a sign of that God is present. And that doesn't work. That doesn't convince Pharaoh one bit. And so now God knows it's going to have to do something more serious. And so we get to the 10 plagues. It's interesting that each one of the plagues that they're going to present may have been an attack on each particular gods that they worship in Egypt. Moses was doing is proving that Yahweh, the God of gods, was far superior to all the gods of Egypt. So they one after another. God does something that counters what that God is supposed to control, what that God is supposed to do. So it proves that they are powerless, that they have no real existence. But we have a list of what the things that he does. First thing he does was turn the Nile into blood. Now that was not only a dramatic trick, a dramatic power, but it also threatens the very life of the Egyptians. They depend on the Nile to water their crops and to water their animals, to get water for themselves. The Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt, so to speak, pun intended, I guess. And so he turns it into blood, and so it's no longer usable. But that doesn't convince Pharaoh. And so now the frogs come out of the sky. Now remember, this is not just one thing right after another, as it might be portrayed on a movie. It is a series of events that take months and months of time. For one thing, Moses has got work to do to get the Hebrew people in behind him, to get them convinced that when he says go, they go. They are not convinced that he is from God yet. And so part of this is to convince the Hebrews, as well as convincing the Egyptians. And so frogs come, and then lice, and then flies, and then the livestock dies. And then there's boils and hail and locusts and darkness. And then all that doesn't convince the Pharaoh yet. You would think that a Pharaoh, after having all that trouble, would say, just get out of here. It's not worth all that, but he's not convinced yet. And so the last plague is the death of the firstborn. Now that means that every from the highest echelon of power to the low slaves that are Egyptians. In fact, everybody, every firstborn is going to die. Firstborn was especially precious to the Jewish, to anybody in that culture, to the Jews as well as the Egyptians, because that meant your lineage was going to keep on. That you're going to begin raising a family that's going to be your Social Security. This is how you, after you were no longer able to do anything, that these are the ones who take care of you. And so they were especially dear to the people for the continuing of their civilization. Now, Moses warns the Hebrews that they can avoid this, and what they have to do is take the blood of a lamb and put it on the doorpost, so that when the angel of death passes over, that it will skip the homes of the Hebrews, the ones that have the marking on the door. So this is the beginning of Passover that has been celebrated for thousands of years, because this is the time that God passed over from the Hebrew people from death to life. This is how God liberated them from slavery. And so they sacrifice a lamb and they put it on the doorpost. And there's several conditions. One of them is that if your neighbor is not wealthy enough to have a lamb, if they can't afford one, you're to share that lamb with them. You're to share the blood with them. So it's a reaching out to the less fortunate. It's a reaching out to those who are not able to do for themselves, and including them in the family of God. Then they eat with their shoes on, with their staff in their hand, ready to go, because that's the way that there's going to be. It's going to be when God calls, you go. And so they stay ready. And Pharaoh decides that it's not all worth it. That it's time to send the Hebrews out. He gives them permission to go. Now, he's going to take that back in just a little bit. But for right now, God has set the slaves free. God always seems to be on the side of the underside of society, on the side of the ones who are the weakest and the least powerful and the most vulnerable. That seems to be God's choice. And so we're going to see what happens after they begin to escape and get into the wilderness next time. So I'll see you. Keep your shoes on and your staff in hand. We're going to go. So I'll see you next time.